find my agenda here and we'll jump right in. No, that's okay. We pick it up as we go.
Recording in progress.
Okay, let's call the meeting to order. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
I know, we're a little slow on the update. Could I have the roll call of the board, please? Or commission?
Commissioner Snyder,
Here.
Commissioner Young,
Here.
Commissioner Cooney,
Present.
Acting Chair Davis,
Acting Chair Davis, here.
Councilmember Sneddon.
Here.
Okay. Any changes to the agenda this morning?
Vice Chair Davis, there are no changes to the agenda.
Great. We will then move to general public comment. This is items which are not on our agenda today, but within the Water Commission's purview. Anybody wishing to speak under general public comment?
Acting Chair Davis, we have no speakers for general public comment.
Good, thank you very much. That takes us to the consent calendar. We have 3 items on the consent calendar today. Item 1 is the approval of the meeting minutes for November 20th, 2025. Second, item 2 is contracts for the construction of the Villa Lucero wastewater force main replacement project. And item number 3, contracts for the construction of the Sheffield Pump Station electrical instrumentation and controls replacement project. Are there any comments or questions on any of those 3 items?
Can I approve the minutes if I read it, but I wasn't here?
Yeah, actually, I have seen lately that the rules have changed a little bit. You can actually vote on minutes when you weren't here with the, again.
Unlimited power.
Okay, so looking for a motion with no other comment or questions, looking for a motion to approve consent calendar.
All motion.
I have a motion
Second, yeah.
and a second. All right, roll call, please.
Commissioner Snyder,
Yes.
Commissioner Young,
Yes.
Commissioner Cooney,
Yes.
Acting Chair Davis.
Yes, that motion passes. 4-1 or 4 with 1 absent. Takes us to administrative items. Item 4 is the annual water supply management report and water supply update. Mr. Hagmark.
Yes, Vice Chair Davis, Commissioners, Council Liaison Sneddon. Really excited. So we're doing something a little different here on multiple levels. We have combined, we typically do our backwards looking back at last water year as a separate presentation, and then we do a 3-year look ahead as 2 separate. We've combined those 2 together today. And then we've also moved to a story map format. And with me today is Jasmine Showers, and I hope you're as impressed as I was. This came out really well, and hoping it sparks a lot of good conversation. We've got a lot of good information to go over today. So with that, thank you.
Good morning, Commissioners and Councilmember Sneddon. I'm Jasmine Showers, Water Resources Analyst, and today presenting the City of Santa Barbara Water Supply Update. And as Mr. Hagmark mentioned, this is Story Map, so we're following in the footsteps of our colleagues here. And instead of an outline, you can see the different sections of the report here at the bottom of the screen. Talk about rainfall and drought status, water year 2025 supply recap, looking forward 3 years for the water supply outlook, and then groundwater basin status, and then I do have a recommendation for the Commission. The water supply update provides an overview of the city's water supplies following the conclusion of last water year. And this is covered in the 2025 Annual Water Supply Management Report. The AWSMR report fulfills a requirement for participating in the State Water Project. So the city is required to show compliance with our water management plan, provide reasonable estimates of total supplies available, report on groundwater basin management conditions, and describe expected water use for the next water year. The city's enhanced urban water management plan was adopted in 2021, and that serves as the water supply and management strategy for the next 30 years. And a note that the AWSMR report includes topics that won't be covered in today's presentation. So if you want more information about water supply capital projects, water supply issues, and water conservation status, that's available in the report. I'll start with the rainfall and drought status. And this is looking back at the last water year. And as a reminder, that's from October 1st, 2024 to September 30th of 2025. And as you can see, it was a lower rain year than the past couple of years. Gibraltar received 46% of average annual precipitation. Lake Cachuma was at 45%, and Santa Barbara was at 56%. It's interesting to compare this to what has happened so far this water year. So I'll try to get on the same screen. So water year 2026 so far, so this is just October and November, we're already near or above rainfall for the whole water year. For example, at Lake Cachuma, we're at 52% of precipitation for the entire water year already. This is showing the 50-year Gibraltar rainfall by water year. It's going from 1975 to 2026. And the blue lines show total annual rainfall in inches. The orange line is the 10-year running average, and then the black line is the 50-year average. Now, if you look at the bottom right of the screen, you can see that we had 14 inches of rain in 2025, and then in 2026, we already have 11 inches of rain. And then it's also interesting to see that the 10-year running average and the 50-year average are the same. So we're very average right now. Yeah. And this is showing the U.S. drought monitor. And this graph is really good for tracking large-scale trends statewide. We don't use it to plan local supply reliability. At the end of the water year, you can see that most of the state was experiencing some amount of abnormally dry conditions. So that's the yellow and the other shades of color. And I'll slide over to 2 months later. Oopsies. What'd I do? Okay, I'm gonna do that again. So sliding over 2 months later, you can see that with the precipitation that we've had, most of that abnormally dry conditions have gone. Uh-oh, did something weird. Here we go. And this is showing the seasonal precipitation outlook for December, January, and February. And Central Coast California shows a slight chance of below average precipitation for the next few months. You can see that in that tan color. And then there's also a weak La Nina predicted. And that typically leads to more northerly storm tracks and then drier conditions. However, 2023 was a weak La Nina as well. And we all know that that had that very high precipitation. And next, talk about the water year 2025 supply recap. And the city last year the supply that we used the most was Gibraltar Reservoir. This graph is showing total production for water year 2025. On the left is the total planned, and on the right is the actual water used. And the height of the bar shows the total amount of water, either planned or used. And then the colors correspond to the different water supplies used to meet that total. And this does include all water obligations, that's sales and overlap with neighboring districts. And then the demand, you might notice, is higher for the projected demand on the left. And that's because it's still from the 2020 EU WMF demand projections. So moving forward, we'll have those new updated demand projections. And as you can see, I think the takeaway is that we used a lot more Gibraltar water than we were expecting to. And this graphic really shows how the city has one of the most diverse water supply portfolios in California. You can see our past supplies were made up of 3 major supplies. and now we have 8. And the next part of the presentation will show these sources geographically, which really helps to highlight the diversity of our water supplies. So starting with the State Water Project, you can see that on the map is showing the California State Water Project aquifer main lines. And you can see how far the water travels, and then this branch right here is the Central Coast branch. In water year 2025, the city received 50% allocation, so that's 1,650 acre feet. And the city did not use State Water Project last year. We'll zoom down to San Luis Reservoir. The city has over 4,300 acre feet stored in San Luis Reservoir. And then additionally, 25% of our unused allocation from last year will convert to carryover starting in January. And San Luis is interesting. It's a shared reservoir between the state and the federal United States Bureau of Reclamation. And it's estimated that it has a 50% chance, slightly over 50% chance of spilling. I'll show you what that looks like. This is showing San Luis Reservoir storage, and the top dotted red line shows the total capacity from the federal share, and the middle red dotted line shows the state capacity. And then the dark blue is the DWR share of the water, and light blue is the federal share. So you can see towards the right that the dark blue is nearing its part of the capacity of the lake. And that's where that slightly over 50% chance comes of spilling. There is a history of the two agencies working together to share allocation if needed. Is there a question? You looked.
I actually did have a question relative to spilling. We've had this incident before. Does the spill basically take it on the percentage of total or percentage of the carryover? What's the formula for when there's a spill, how we would lose our allocation?
My understanding is we lose all of our carryover water if
Yeah.
it's a paper spill.
Right, I understand that.
Is it?
Yeah.
Yeah, Ms.
Good.
Corey says that's right.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is something that we're keeping an eye on, and then hoping that the agencies could work together, since the federal has the share of the lake, they have more room right now.
It's an interesting take, just talking about how the water is used. So the federal water is typically used for ag, and so there's an interest there to get it out of the lake and get it into the ground or irrigate with it, whereas most of the state water is municipalities of sorts, and there's a larger driver there to conserve and prepare for, a dry year or multiple dry years. So it's a different philosophy in how that water is used.
Can you clarify what a paper spill is?
Yeah, I just mean that it's not a physical spill, because as you can see, there's room in the reservoir.
And so then who gets that water?
So here's what ultimately happens is they just stop pumping water into the California aqueduct and into the lake. So this lake has really no natural tributaries feeding it. It's entirely man-made. Water is pumped from the California aqueduct up into San Luis Reservoir. And so when this spill occurs, they just stop pumping water from the delta, and basically the water that they're using is out of the lake. So it becomes that spill situation. But
Thank you.
Now we're going to zoom down to Cachuma. Oh, thank you. The city received 100% allocation for the last water year, so that's 8,277 acre feet. Cachuma provided 26% of last year's water supplies, and the lake ended the water year at almost 78% capacity. And the city ended the water year with a carryover balance of over 13,500 acre feet. And Gibraltar Reservoir provided 38% of total water year supplies. The ending storage for Gibraltar was at 21% capacity. And the city also released 227 acre feet to downstream users, and that's per the Jin Chow agreement. And the latest bathymetric survey that we have is still from September 2024, so I'll show you that now. This is the Gibraltar Reservoir hydrograph from 2000 to 2025. And the blue shows the total storage volume over the years. And then the orange line represents the total capacity. And where you see the changes in capacity is where the city has bathymetric survey data. And then new for this year, we also added 2 major fire events for the watershed. In late 2007, there was the Zaka fire. And then in 2017 was the Thomas fire. And as you can see at the bathymetric surveys after those fire events, you can see the capacity really change at the lake, especially from I would say the Zaka fire is the largest drop. And then the Thomas had more of a delayed effect.
We tend to lose about 100 acre feet a year, just on average, as we go along. As we obviously have gotten now to the point where the lake bottom is right at the bottom of the release gates. So I do think, barring any major fires, that trend should kind of slow down. Because as we do releases now, when we get storm events, it's going to take a lot of sediment with it.
On the map, it's showing the approximate location of Mission Tunnel and that blue and gray dotted line. Mission Tunnel acts as a horizontal groundwater well as groundwater seeps in through the natural sandstone bedrock. Mission Tunnel provided 10% of total supplies last year. And the map is showing a simplified version of our groundwater basins. There'll be more about groundwater basin and more detailed map later on. There was no groundwater pumping in water year 2025. Major updates for groundwater included the city finished the application for the ASR permit for San Roque Well, and that was submitted. And then also, as presented to Water Commission in October, the sustainable use numbers were recently defined in the 2025 USGS study update. And the city continues to monitor water levels and seawater intrusion. Now the map is showing the desalination. The plant, approximate location of the plant is shown in that green star. And then the solid green line is the inflow pipe, and the dotted green line is the outflow. Desal provided 17% of total water year supplies, and desal continues to provide an important role in drought preparation, response, and recovery, especially in the way it allows the city to rest groundwater basins and bank surface water supplies, especially at Lake Cachuma. And this is showing the location of El Estero in the pink star, and then the recycled water main lines are shown there in pink as well. Recycled water provided 9% of total supplies last year, and it serves an important water supply role by offsetting potable water use for large landscapes. And now we'll move forward to the water supply outlook. As you know, we plan ahead as staff for the next 3 water years. So in this case, that's water year 2026 through 2028. The city can meet demands in the next 3 water years, even when assuming dry conditions. We don't plan to pump groundwater, and we do not plan to use state water project water. The next part of the presentation will show the conservative planning assumptions for each of the supplies that we do plan to use. At Lake Cachuma, the city's maximum annual allocation is that 8,277 acre feet. The annual allocation is determined by USBR, and they look at all of the unallocated water in the lake and then they make their own predictions of lake drawdown. We know that we have 100% allocation for the next water year. And at the start of water year 2026, the city had over 21,000 acre feet of water stored in the lake. The conservative assumption moving forward for the next 2 water years is that we'll receive an 80% allocation. Is there a question?
I hit my button, you saw that, huh?
Yeah.
If you have any questions, just raise them. My question has, again, with carryover, there was some discussion at the county or at the Bureau of Reclamation about whether carryover was going to continue or not. Any updates on that?
Vice Chair Davis, there has been no updates on that because there's nobody working at the Bureau right now. So there really are lean. There's not, there's really like one person, I think, left that we have worked with in the past there. So pretty much all discussions by the Bureau on curtailing or going after punishing those who are carrying water in the lake has kind of stopped. So hopefully when they do staff back up, there'll be a different tone, different conversation around that. But yeah, there really hasn't been anything.
Good, thank you.
I'm sure I've asked this before, so you can refresh my memory on this. The Cachuma water is less expensive than desal. And where's that point where we could decrease our desal production and increase our Cachuma draw while we have, 20,000 acre feet in there?
We are having that conversation now, and it's in the form of trying to figure out how we can turn down or turn off desal in the summer. That's primarily our biggest expense in the summer is electricity for desal, and so if we could curtail the facility, that would be pretty optimum. Again, the plant itself does not like to sit idle, like most things of that complexity. It starts to deteriorate pretty quickly, and so we're still trying to figure out what that fine line is for that, but that's right now our conversations, and I think we're going to come back in May of 2026 with a more developed conversation around that.
So we really don't know at what reduced production out of the desal plant keeps everything safe and functioning.
I think we're trying to establish that because we are on the precipice, I think, of our groundwater basins being in a pretty good state in which we could start pumping them without doing any damage to them, so kind of that sustainable yield from them. And so what I think we're targeting is May is to kind of have a fuller conversation about, here's how much we now have in storage in Cachuma. We'll know, the end of this water year. Here's where our groundwater basins are, and we feel like we can do X. We feel like this would allow us to start taking and making some different decisions about how we operate desal. We did in this past summer, have been working to turn it off from 4 to 9, or turn it down, I should say, from 4 to 9. So playing around with its flexibility and seeing how that works. It is complicated because we do have a contract operator, so that makes those decisions a little more complicated. But nonetheless, this is a conversation we definitely want to have with the commission and the community in May when we have a little more information.
Good. Thank you.
For this water year, we're projecting that Cachuma will supply 67% so the majority of our water supplies. For Gibraltar and Mission Tunnel, at the end of water year 2025, Gibraltar was 21% full. For planning purposes, and again, just to be conservative, we're assuming that all of the water received at Gibraltar will go towards refilling the reservoir. So we're concentrating on Mission Tunnel. And the conservative assumption there is 75 acre feet per month. And this is lower than what we usually see, which is about 100 acre feet per month. And that is expected for water years 2026 through 2028, and that's 7% of projected demand. For desal, the maximum production capacity is 3,125 acre-feet per year. The conservative assumption here is we assume that desal will produce at 80% of total capacity. For the next water year, due to some planned maintenance, we know that will be a little bit lower. That'll be about 2,140 acre-feet, or 17% of demand. And then the next 2 water years will go up to that 80% capacity, which is 2,500 acre-feet. And the final water source is recycled water. We assume that 840 acre-feet of production will be used directly by customers. And then El Estero processed water is very consistent if we look at the past production. And we're assuming 260 acre-feet of processed water. Total planned recycled production is 1,100 acre-feet per year for the next 3 water years. And I'll expand on this graph in a minute. I know it's a favorite graph. Just as a reminder, the first 10 years are shown here are the actual water used, and then the last 3 years show projected demand. The height of the bars is the total amount of either water used or projected, and then the different colors correspond to the different water supplies making up that total. If you look at the right side of the screen, you can see water year 2025 and then the 3 projected years. And largely due to the large amount of water we have available in Cachuma, the majority of water that we project to use is from Cachuma. And that doesn't change very much in the next 3 years. Yes.
Is this still from the 2020 Urban Water Management Plan, or are we now kind of shifting into the next planning period?
Oh, good question. These are from our updated demands. Yeah.
And can you help me understand, like, why we had, our biggest source was Gibraltar this year, but we expect it to be next to nothing in coming years?
Yeah, Gibraltar was very low at the end of the water year, and then with that comes reduced water quality as well. So when we have more water available at Cachuma, that makes it more attractive to use that Cachuma water and let Gibraltar refill.
Okay, so it's really a water quality question.
Mm-hmm.
And the assumption here is that it remains dry.
Yes.
I think as we continue forward, we can make, some assumptions related to Gibraltar, but it really becomes more of a water quality issue about what we can get out of there.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Now we'll talk about groundwater basin status. In 2018, the U.S. This is starting at the end. Just a second. Groundwater is conjunctively used with other supplies, so we typically have higher pumping during drought and then lower pumping when surface water supplies are abundant. And groundwater is very important, especially in the case of a local supply emergency, or an emergency it is a local supply. The map is showing the 2 primary groundwater basins. The Foothill Basin is in green, and then the Santa Barbara Basin is in blue. And the dotted dark gray lines are showing our different storage unit areas. So we have the Foothill Storage Unit 1, and then Storage Unit 3, which we typically don't use. There's 7 groundwater production wells, and those are shown as the blue diamonds on the map. 2 are in Foothill, and 5 are in Storage Unit 1. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, as a condition of participating in the State Water Project, the city is required to report on the current status of its groundwater resources. And the city works with USGS to monitor water levels and water quality. And on the map, the groundwater monitoring wells are shown in the white dots. We're zooming in on Foothill, and you can see the labels for the production wells and for the monitoring wells. And then also on the map is the location of La Cumbra Mutual Water Company's well that's also in the Foothill Basin, because the city is not the only pumper in the basin. La Cumbra can Mutual Water Company can pump up to 300 acre-feet per year. And current water levels for Foothill Basin are close to 2011 levels. I'll show you that. And this is a very similar graph to the one that you saw in October. You can see that the squiggly lines correspond to the left side of the graph and their water surface elevations. And then pumping is at the bottom, and that corresponds to the right side of the graph. And city pumping is in red, and green pumping, which is La Cumbre, is in green. And if you look at the right side of the graph for current conditions and kind of follow that over here, it corresponds roughly to 2011, 2012 levels. And now we'll zoom over to Storage Unit 1. In Storage Unit 1, pumped groundwater levels recover quickly, so the primary concern is seawater intrusion. And we monitor these groundwater wells that you can see for, they're sampled for chloride concentrations. And for context, you can see the location of El Estero Water Resource Center. Move that over. And then the well that we most closely monitor for seawater intrusion is 23F4. And at that well, we continue to see decreasing trend in chloride level concentrations. So this is showing the chloride concentration levels from 1986, and our last reading is from June of 2025. And the blue line shows the chloride levels at the well. And so you can see those rose up during the pumping through the last drought, and now they're decreasing. And then for context, towards the top of the screen, you can see the orange line showing local ocean chloride, and that's over 19,000 milligrams per liter. So in conclusion, for the groundwater status, we do have our maximum drought yield from the 2018 USGS study, and that continues to be an important tool. It shows the absolute maximum we could pump in case of a long-term drought. And then, as discussed in October, we also have the USGS study update from 2025, and that shows a sustainable yield for each basin. And the basins are not in overdraft condition. The city's pumping over the last 10 years is less than both the max drought yield and the sustainable yield. I'll show you that. This is showing the 10-year drought storage, 10-year sustainable yield, and then 10 years of actual groundwater production from each basin. Blue is showing that total drought yield, and green is showing the sustainable yield over 10 years. And as you can see, the actual pumping is less than the sustainable yield and the maximum drought yield.
I was going to just add that right now and I will update this in May, but I'm thinking that starting like July of 2027, we'll be wanting to start up our groundwater well production. So that's currently kind of my mindset. Making sure that all the infrastructure is ready to go for that is probably what we'll be spending the next year or so on, and making sure we get that into the next 2-year budget, which is coming up, to be able to reactivate the Ortega groundwater treatment plant. So that's what I'm thinking, but that's just going to give you a sense of when we come back in May, kind of the discussion, some of the discussion items we'll hit on.
All right. And with that, we're at the recommendation section. I ask that Water Commission recommend that council approve and adopt the City of Santa Barbara Water Supply Management Report for the 2025 water year, finding that the groundwater basins are not in overdraft condition in accordance with the conjunctive management element of the city's enhanced urban water management plan.
Great, thank you for the presentation.
Yeah.
Questions and comments at this point?
I
Jeff?
do. just out of curiosity, what's the status of our effort to engage with groundwater storage basins? I think at some point we're looking in San Luis Obispo County or elsewhere for storing water.
We are, maybe Ms. Corey could come up and talk about that, because we have had some conversations, and I want to say we've I think identified someone who can help us, but maybe she can give us more details on that.
Yeah, so that's still an ongoing effort. As you saw in Ms. Shower's presentation, we have a decent amount of state water project water stored in San Luis right now, and I would really like to optimize the use of those supplies by banking them or selling them to maximize their use. You know, they're just sitting in San Luis right now. Groundwater basins that we could store them in are tricky because the new ones have a really high capital investment, so they're costly. And the ones that are established are fairly full, but we are still looking into those opportunities as they exist. Another opportunity is to look at some sort of transfer agreement with other users on the state water project. And so what that might look like is we have some sort of supply agreement with, say, like a large agricultural producer that has lots of groundwater rights. And so they could use their groundwater rights when the system is dry and we need our state water. And then when it's wet, they could be putting that state water to use. So it would benefit both parties. And I have a couple of leads on that type of exchange. And once something comes together with more details, we'd bring it back to the commission for.
Great, thank you.
Other questions or comments? Kristen?
The GIS story maps, this is really next level. I mean, really, there are things here that became clear that we've been presented many times, but it's the movement of it. And what I love most about it is the transparency, because so many times I'll go back and look at a presentation to hear or get reacquainted with the sort of the words you're saying that go along with slides, but here the words are there. And so it's any member of the public can just go through the story map and hone in. And that I love that the droplet is back with the different parts, and it's enhanced with each one, the assumptions, the amount, and the updated graph that we all love that has the actual numbers on it. But the map of where all these different water sources are from, it really crystallized something. I hadn't put that all together. So love this. And I'm sure so much goes into just figuring out even how to do a story map in the first place. So I'm just next level, really amazing.
Thank you.
Yeah, here.
Yeah.
Other questions? Yeah. I have one. Desal, conveyance line up to Cater. It wasn't mentioned at all. Where's the status operationally?
Planning to hit on that next month when we talk about the water system. But it is currently offline, and we are working with the contractor to come up with a long-term repair for the break that occurred last year. That line, we don't feel comfortable putting it back in service until we've resolved the cause of that failure.
Great. No other questions or comments? Anyone from the public wishing to speak on this item?
Acting Chair Davis, we have no speakers for public comment. And if I didn't tell you, just for the record, we also didn't have any speakers for public comment on the consent calendar.
Okay. For the record, good. Okay, with that, we're looking for a recommendation, looking for a motion to approve staff recommendation.
I'll move the staff's recommendation.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. A roll call vote, please.
Commissioner Snyder,
Yes.
Commissioner Young,
Yes.
Commissioner Cooney,
Yes.
Acting Chair Davis.
Yes. Motion is 4-0 with one absent. Motion passes. Thank you very much. Great presentation. Thank you. Okay, taking us to item 5, this is the draft wastewater and water systems climate adaptation plan.
Vice Chair Davis, Commissioners, Council Liaison Snedden, excited to be here today to talk about this. We did present this in a lighter version to council, is that a week ago? Kind of going over what the city is doing across the board in, for all of the various studies that are going on. So this one, we're going to give you a little taste of what's going on across the city, but really dive into the impacts that we've identified for the wastewater system. So we've got a diverse speaker group today, but we're going to start off with Melissa Hedrick, and she'll walk you through the first part of our presentation.
Good morning, Chair Davis and Commissioners. Melissa Hetrick, Adaptation and Resilience Manager in the Sustainability and Resilience Department. And yes, I'm here today to talk about our draft wastewater and water systems climate adaptation plan that got released for public review last week. And I did just want to acknowledge the team on this one. We had a team of consultants that was led by Rob Morrow of Water Systems Consulting, as well as Environmental Science Associates. And then we had an inner team that was there every step of the way, and include Kelly Bork in Public Works Engineering and Bradley Rare in Water Resources. And then we had an outer team that was there for every milestone, the whole leadership team of the Water Resources Department now. So Joshua Hagmark, of course, Dakota Corey, Matt Ward, and then Thomas Welch. And then assistance from my division came from Michael Wells and Timmy Bolton. So it was really a very big team effort. So I wanted to start with a quick overview of our adaptation and resilience program at the city, because it's really changed over the last few years and developed. So the adaptation and resilience program helps our community prepare for current and future climate-related hazards like sea level rise, flooding, erosion, and wildfires. And when I use the word program, I'm really talking about the program across the city. We have a division of 3 people that within sustainability and resilience that serves as the hub for all this and is central coordination. But really, it's being implemented throughout the city, and it's with partners like Water Resources where we actually, get projects done. And so I really want to acknowledge those partners throughout the city that have been extremely supportive of this program. So the program really takes a wraparound approach and looks at adaptation to climate hazards in a multifaceted approach. So we're incorporating climate changes into city planning processes. So for instance, when Ms. Corey updated the enhanced water management plan a few years ago, she incorporated climate changes and extended drought into that document. We're reducing flood and erosion risks with our Public Works Department through flood control projects and other mitigation projects. We're adapting city infrastructure like this project does. We're looking at modifications to building standards. Do we need to be flood-proofing to higher levels? And then we're really wanting to focus on providing our community the resources to adapt. Many of our areas that flood frequently are low-income areas that really need assistance with adaptation. And as you'll see, moving forward, this will take a fair amount of funds. And so we're really working hard, especially in the next year or so, to, first of all, go after state and federal sources of funding, but also to start to look at permanent funding sources at the local level. And then we are leveraging our regional partnerships like Beacon and our Regional Climate Collaborative, so that we're not inventing the wheel. So as you know...
Yeah, I think we have a question.
Oh, go ahead.
Just a quick question on the prior slide. So reduce flood and erosion risks and adapt city infrastructure and assets. Have we done any of those things already? Or is this planning to do those things?
Great question, Commissioner Young. We've always had these programs of risk reduction. So for instance, we've done the Lower Emission Creek Flood Control Project over the years. And a lot of the work we're doing is addressing existing hazards that are just going to get worse. So we've always had all these programs in place, looking at I&I and our wastewater system. That's a form of adaptation and risk reduction. It's just that we're really having to ramp up efforts now, and this provides the coordination and central vision for that over time.
So it's in progress. We are
It's a work
doing
in progress.
all the time. But does climate change add now a different level of risk over and above the current risk that we've been experiencing over decades and decades? So now when you look at something to be addressed, are you adding a component to whatever adaptation needs to be done?
Yes, certainly, and I have several slides that speak to that ramp up of risk that we are already seeing and will see over the next several decades that really require us to make some big changes.
Right, okay.
Yeah. So in 2021, our city council adopted the city's first adaptation plan, sea level rise adaptation plan. And this really has provided the foundation for all of our projects. All of our projects now address not just sea level rise, but other climate hazards, such as changes in rainfall patterns we're seeing. But this really provided the foundation, provided one cohesive vision. It laid forth our entire adaptation planning methodology of phased planning based on monitoring of changing conditions and then taking certain actions as certain triggers are reached. It also included a set of guiding principles that really have been extremely useful in prioritizing actions. And so all the projects you see today were actually identified as the highest priority actions coming out of this plan. It's just that we've moved beyond sea level rise, looking at all the hazards.
Great photo, by the way.
Yeah, I believe that was Mr. Davis's photo.
That's right.
He's very proud of it. I don't see her name up there, though. I actually think it's on the next page.
Go to the next page.
On the next
I got
page.
credit.
Yes.
Thank you.
So these are our active major projects. We've obtained over $5 million of funding from the Coastal Conservancy and the California Coastal Commission and really launched a myriad of projects. I am going to just touch on a few because I think they show how we're kind of attacking the problem at different levels, but the projects are very much coordinated. So for instance, Environmental Science Associates is on this project, the wastewater project, and also the waterfront project. So there's a lot of overlap, and we are coordinating the projects even though they're separate projects. So the first one is the Regional Coastal Adaptation Monitoring Program. This is being run out of Beacon, which is a joint powers authority of all the coastal jurisdictions in Santa Barbara and Ventura County. And essentially what it does is provide a central hub of monitoring changing coastal conditions, with the purpose being to provide managers like us the information real time to know how our coast is changing, and so in order to make phased adaptation decisions. And so a report on this was just released in August from Beacon, outlining the highest priority items for the region to monitor. And in most cases, this data is already available. It's USGS data, it's NOAA data. It's more a matter of actually evaluating the data in all the same methodology and providing it in a ready-to-view way. So we have two pilots that are coming out of this. One is just a baseline conditions report, so essentially providing that first monitoring report, bringing us up to the current day of changes that have occurred on our coastline. And then the second is a pilot that's currently unfunded with USGS that is looking at using satellite data and essentially making a companion tool to Cosmos, if anybody's familiar with that, that would show how our shoreline is changing over time using satellite data. So we are seeking funding for that right now. The Waterfront Adaptation Plan launched about a year ago. It looks at providing adaptation measures and really preparing our waterfront for the next 30 years of sea level rise and coastal changes. Our waterfront in the last few years has experienced a lot of erosion. You can see on the slide, we had a parking lot collapse into the ocean. We've had a lot of storm surge going almost to Cabrillo Boulevard. And so we've really started to take a close look at how, of those hazards and how sediment's moving along this waterfront area, and have come up with a suite of initial adaptation options that we will be bringing out publicly in the February, March timeframe. And really, once we identify that final list of adaptation measures, then we'll be drilling down and doing the analysis of modeling what flooding looks with them and without them, looking at costs, and then a plan will be produced at the end of the year that we'll then shop out publicly as well. So some of the things, just a little preview that we're looking at on that project, because it's exciting, are things like moving back the bikeway and raising it. To provide some backstop flood protection at the waterfront, but then increasing our beach size to allow the beach to continue for longer. So stay tuned for that, but that will be coming in the next year. And then we are just launching a new stormwater model. This is funded by the Coastal Conservancy and then also Measure B Creek funds. And it would be a pilot area producing the city's first stormwater model, a model of our stormwater system, and then modeling flooding impacts from some of these lower level storms. So not just the 100-year storm that we see in our FEMA maps, but like the 5 and 10 and 20 and 50-year storm, which we are now starting to see those flooding levels much more frequently. And then identifying capacity improvements that could be done and analyzing options for Laguna Creek. So this is a really important project for the city, and we're excited to launch it. And it's very much related to the information that you will see today. And actually, the wastewater plans, one of its major recommendations was to do this study. And so we're excited to launch that. So moving now into the plan. So I introduced the staff team and the consultant team just to emphasize that this was a team effort. So again, we released a public plan December 9th, and we'll have a public comment period till February 9th, I believe. In that time period, we'll be going to Creeks Advisory Committee, Planning Commission, back to Water Commission for comments and recommendation, and then hopefully going to back to council in the April-May timeframe for approval of the plan. So the plan does analyze all climate impacts. So think rising groundwater levels, changes in rainfall patterns, increased drought conditions, wildfire, to all portions of the water and wastewater systems. Every outfall, every intake, every pipe was looked at. We did perform a risk assessment to define the highest priorities and the highest vulnerabilities. That risk assessment essentially showed most of the highest risks and vulnerabilities associated with the wastewater system. So when you look at the adaptation measures, it's almost all about the wastewater system, and that's not because we didn't look at the water system. In our 300-page report, you can read about the water system, but the highest risks were really all to the wastewater system, and in particular to the collection and treatment system. And really the highest risks were related to flooding impacts to the system. Again, this plan implements our overall program approach of phased implementation based on close monitoring of changing conditions. And there's two major assumptions in the plan. And one of them is that we cannot fully prevent flooding in the low-lying areas of the city. There's just no way for us to, over time, especially with sea level rise, eliminate flooding in those areas with flood control measures. We could lessen that flooding, but we can't prevent it. And so when you look at the adaptation measures proposed in this plan, citywide flood control measures could delay the need for them, but they will all be needed eventually, if that makes sense. And so that really highlights the need to monitor conditions and keep track of our projects and how we're performing while we're making phased decisions. So as part of all these projects, we did update our hazard models and analysis for those of you involved in the original sea level rise adaptation process. You'll see the maps are a bit different. So this is the 2024 projections from the state for sea level rise in Santa Barbara. And really, we're focusing on the orange line, which is the intermediate high risk. And if you look at our current trajectories for sea level rise, we really are on that orange line. But the other highly likely line is the blue. So we are planning for, in the near term, 0.8 feet of sea level rise from now until 2050. In the midterm, up to 2.5 feet of sea level rise by 2075. And then around 4.9 or 5 feet of sea level rise by 2100. And something to note about this graph, in the near term, you'll see that the lines are very close together. There's not a lot of uncertainty about our sea level rise projections in the next, say, 25 years. It's only when we get out further that there's more of a range based on uncertainties associated with things like the Antarctic ice sheet and things like that. So just looking at the new flood risk downtown, these are our coastal flooding maps. So these only show flooding and erosion from wave hazards, from storm surge from the ocean. They do not show flooding from rainfall hazards. So this is our current condition. We've experienced about 3 to 4 inches of sea level rise to date. And the aqua is high tide, so that's the regular high tide inundation. The one-year storm is the one-year wave events that we see annually. Then we have the 20-year and then the 100-year storm event. And then again, that's the wave event, not the rainfall event. And again, these maps are what would happen if we do nothing. So at 0.8 feet of sea level rise around 2050, I was going to just point out here, this does show some flooding north of Cabrillo Boulevard. For the most part, we see flooding and erosion now south of Cabrillo Boulevard only. But I will say that we are beginning to see some saltwater intrusion into Cabrillo Ballfield area, north of Cabrillo, where it's killing the grass. And so this is very much an accurate representation of what we're seeing. At 0.8 feet of sea level rise, we start to see the annual wave event and storm surge cross Cabrillo Boulevard in several locations, in particular on the East Beach side of the waterfront. At 1.6 feet of sea level rise, so around 2060, we start to see the annual storm surge event go up to the railroad. At 2.5 feet, we start to see more of that area below the railroad annually flooding with storm surge. And then we see in more extreme events all the way up to Highway 101. By 3.3 feet of sea level rise, we start seeing annual storm surge and some flooding from the high tide all the way up to Highway 101. And then some in very extreme storms flooding north of Highway 101. And then this is the end of the century, 2100, where we start seeing flooding from the regular high tide north of Highway 101 to almost the Coda area. And for those of you that know the history of Santa Barbara, this really represents the map of the old El Estero, which was an old tidal wetland that existed in Santa Barbara but was filled in after the 1929 earthquake, and still remains a very low-lying portion of the city that floods from not just in the future with storm surge, but with rainfall. So these are our erosion projections. What I don't show on here are the erosion projections for the bluff areas. So the beaches that are backed by bluffs, so think the Mesa and Hope Ranch areas, it's projected that by 0.8 feet of sea level rise, we will lose about 50% access to those beaches because they essentially get flooded out. And by 2.5 feet of sea level rise, we lose about 80% access. So that underscores the importance of our beaches that aren't backed by bluffs, that have a low-lying area behind it to move back. Those really represent, in our region, the areas where we can keep beach access moving forward. And so that's a high priority of our waterfront plan, is really looking at ways to keep beach access on our waterfront. So these are the erosion projections over time with sea level rise. And you'll see that on Ledbetter side, while there is some erosion shown, it does, relative to other areas, hold steady. And the reason for that is that the harbor breakwater essentially acts as a groin, holding up the beach at Ledbetter. So moving forward, we're really seeing Ledbetter as an opportunity area to keep a great beach, move some stuff back to make the beach wider, and really make that an even better beach than it is now. Shown on the bottom of the slide is West Beach. West Beach is actually an accretional beach. Because of the harbor breakwater, it fills in with sand. And so moving forward, it really presents a great opportunity also to have a great beach and improve the conditions of that beach. On East Beach, we see a very high rate of erosion. We're currently seeing a rate of erosion of 5 feet a year on East Beach. And anyone who went out recently on the recent king tides will have seen that the water was all the way up to the bike path and sloshing over the bike path. And so the erosion projections there show, continue to show that very high rate of erosion on East Beach. So this is a really high priority area when we're looking at our waterfront adaptation plan. So this is our current 100-year rainfall flooding map through FEMA. It doesn't show climate hazard, so it's historic flooding, but I just wanted to kind of remind everybody of our current flood hazard area from rainfall. So what's happening with climate change is, even though maybe the temperatures within Santa Barbara proper haven't changed that much, the upper atmosphere's temperatures are rising. And what happens when with those rising upper atmosphere temperatures is that the air can contain more moisture, almost 4% more moisture over time. And so the clouds contain more moisture. And so when it does rain, it's raining at much higher rates. So while our annual average rainfall year to year is not changing that much, we're seeing rain come in these huge bursts of very high intensity rain events followed by no rain, so drought periods. So it's a boom or bust system. And so of course, when you have rain over multiple days that's steady, rain can infiltrate into soil and get into our stormwater system without flooding. But when we see those really high intensity rain events, we see a lot of flooding of our streets and systems. So a perfect example of this was a couple of weeks ago when we had our first rain of the season in November. Normally the first rain of the season, we would not see flooding with our creeks dry and our groundwater basins empty. But because of the rainfall rates, we saw flooding in downtown. So as part of this project, Environmental Science Associates took a look at the climate projections and tried to relate them to flooding frequencies that we've seen before. And so a 10-year storm like the one we saw in January 2023, so that's a 10-year rain event, is now moving forward with these climate changes twice as likely to occur. So it's essentially a 5-year event now. And then the 100-year storm like that we saw in 1998 is about 7 times more likely to increase. 7 times more likely to occur. So it's essentially now like a 15-year storm. So this really highlights the need to aggressively look at flood control measures, but also how are we accommodating all this flooding that's much more frequent.
Is Caltrans planning what to do with 101 in areas that are close to the ocean? Are they in a planning process right now?
Yeah, Commissioner Young, they do have a sea level rise planning process across the state. It's statewide, and we are working with them on our particular projects. I don't know of a particular project or a final plan that they've produced, though.
Okay, and how about the train tracks? Whose responsibility Is it to,
It's Union Pacific Railroad.
Yeah.
So again, we are working with them on our projects. I do not know of a coordinated climate plan for them. They do have particular projects where they're seeing erosion and flooding, but I am not aware of a master planning project for them.
okay,
So as part of the modeling for this project, we did look at the combined 100-year rainfall event with sea level rise, especially around south of Highway 101, around the area of El Estero. So on the left, you see the existing 100-year rain event flood map. And as you know, the El Estero Water Resources Center was built on higher ground purposely. And so when it floods now, it actually floods around, but not on the property. And this happened just a few weeks ago where we lost access to the plant for a period of time because of flooding around it, but not on the plant itself. By 2.5 feet of sea level rise, we do start to see, in these major rainfall events, flooding on the plant in addition to deeper flooding around it. And so when we get into adaptation recommendations, you'll see recommendations for floodproofing and flood wall systems at El Estero. Yeah, next slide.
So when you say a major rainfall event, is that like this 100-year storm or like?
So we were limited because we only have mapped and data on the 100-year FEMA flood event right now. And so this is the 100-year, this is the 1998 event. Part of the reason it's important for us to do the modeling of the 5 and 10 and 20-year events through that stormwater model I recommended is to really know about frequency. Like how often is this only gonna occur, once every 100 years? What's gonna occur every year? So that's the purpose of that project, is to really get a close look at that combined with sea level rise.
Gotcha. Thank you.
So moving into key vulnerabilities and adaptation strategies, I am going to hand it over to our consultant, Thomas next, Thomas Welch. But just to note that our biggest vulnerabilities are to the wastewater collection system, and they're really related to two things. One, rainfall flooding unintentionally entering the system, and then also seawater entering the system. And as you know, when our wastewater collection system is separate from our stormwater system, where it's supposed to be, and so when the wastewater system gets overwhelmed, what we start to see is sanitary sewer overflows and backing up into the system, or sewage being released through our outfall that is not treated. And so it's something that we work really hard not to happen, right? And so moving forward, we're really trying to be proactive to make sure we don't have those types of situations moving forward. So I'm going to hand it over to Mr. Welch to talk about the system.
Thank you, Ms. Hetrick, Acting Chair Davis, Chair Liaison Snedden, and Water Commissioners. See a map of the collection system, like Ms. Hetrick mentioned. We do currently have some capacity issues. We've had, during that last major storm event, we did have storm-related sanitary sewer overflows, and we have been working to model the system, inspect the system. We had our annual report last month describing a lot of these efforts. So we can go next slide, please. So the main concern with that we're currently facing and will be facing in more significant levels in the future with I&I is inflow and infiltration. That's where stormwater that should be going into the stormwater system is getting into the wastewater system. Usually when you describe that, inflow is flow that's directly entering the system. That results in the high increases in flows that occur very quickly. Infiltration is flow that is entering usually through the shallow groundwater and is like infiltrating into the piping systems. So that's color-coded on the map there. So last month when we showed Our smoke testing program, those were a lot of inflow sources, so broken or uncapped cleanouts, roof drain connections, floor drain connections, those kind of flows are inflows. Our CCTV citywide inspection program, when we inspect the system and we find cracked pipes, roots intruding into pipes, at joints, those create entry points for infiltration to enter the system. So you can see that on both the public system and the private system. So broken sewer laterals with roots intrusions also are flowing into our system, but those are privately owned assets. And we have work very closely with the Creeks Department to try and remove those. There's one there for stormwater cross connections with very aggressive program to look out for those. Just not only for the connection for stormwater getting into the sewer, but sewer getting into the stormwater system. So, and we've been very aggressive on that investigation. Next slide, please. So this shows our maximum daily flow, instantaneous flow rate into the plant for 2023 through 2024. Our average dry weather flow is about 6 million gallons per day over the day. And so when we talk about MGD, I like to compare it to miles per hour. So in an hour, you drive 60 miles, so you have 60 miles per hour. But if you drive 60 miles per hour for 5 minutes, you're not going 60 miles. So these flow rates are that maximum flow rate. So when you see 37.4, that was our peak flow rate for the day. That wasn't the total flow treated for the day. So that also shows why throughout the entire year, our peak flows are about 10 MGD when our average flow for the entire day was 6 MGD. So that's showing the highest flow of the day during those periods. And so seeing these high 37s, 33 MGD spikes becoming a little more frequent with the high intensity flow rates, we're seeing more inflow into the system. What you can also kind of see, you can see the infiltration is after the big peaks, the flow trends down over time a little bit. So if you look in that 2023 period, the average flow is really close to that 10 MGD. In the April 2024 period, it's a little elevated, and that's the infiltration that continues to trickle in. We can see it for 3 to 6 months after a major flow event, rain event, where the shallow groundwater tables are higher, and we have that infiltration into the collection system. Go next slide, please. So went a lot in depth on a lot of this last month during our annual report, but our ongoing I&I reduction efforts, which we're coordinating with the Sustainability Department to make sure that we're meeting our current needs and our future needs, is we did an I&I study in 2024. The first step with that I&I study, it was to update our sewer system hydraulic model. That hydraulic model takes our GIS data, so manhole elevations, depth of sewer location, and creates a model of where you have the water inputs into the system, how the flows will travel through the system. And so what we've been working on is calibrating that model and validating it with real-world observations. So that's tied into the deployment of our smart cover system. So we have over 50 level sensors deployed through the system. That's what you see on the map on the right. And there is a cluster of them in the San Roque area, which was one of the basin areas that we had identified with high I&I. So as we continue to investigate different areas, we can install multiple the level sensors to try and triangulate closer into where the I&I is coming from, so we're more efficient with our smoke testing program, because it is quite costly to go through. We end up pushing a non-toxic smoke into the sewer, and you watch where it comes back up out of the ground, and potentially through roof tie-ins, floor drains, and broken pipes, where it actually start coming up through the soil.
I wanted to just highlight here. I mean, we've been working on this now for a while, trying to get down on this the I&I issue, and we've made. I mean, it's hard to kind of tease it out, but keep in mind our average daily flows in 2010 were about 8 MGD, and we're down to 6. Again, a lot of that has been behavioral changes, but we have seen some reductions. I think what's been frustrating for staff is we've been throwing a lot of resources at trying to get at this I&I issue. And as we get into this, we just need to continue that effort and kind of double down on like, what are we missing? Where can we go? How can we, because it's really tough it rains so infrequently here that it's hard to have people in the field during those rain events to try and capture it. It's also dangerous to be out there, but to really try and capture where exactly is it coming from, because it wouldn't take much. One larger property that's draining their stormwater could make a huge difference. But anyway, my point here is we have been on this issue. This isn't a new issue for us, but it's certainly coming to light that we need to continue to spend significant resources on this effort.
Yeah, and just to add, we're not alone in this space. I was just at a Clean Water SoCal. It's one of our organizations we participate with. It's a conglomerate of Southern California wastewater agencies, and there was many other agencies that are experiencing I&I, not just from the pipes, but they're flooding in the streets, where the flooding is getting, normally our sewers are installed in the middle of the streets kind of arched as a crown, and so you have the water in the gutters, but when the street floods, our manholes get flooded, and you get I&I through the actual just the seal, because they're not bolted on, they're just sitting there. And so what we've done is, over the years, is those manholes used to have a little pick hole, and so you could stick a handle in there and lift it up. Well, now we have sealed all the pick holes, and it's like a little sealed cup now, so that doesn't allow water to penetrate there. But even then, water still gets in there, and that's something that the industry as a whole is facing with in Southern California. Thank you.
Hello, Commissioners, Ms. Sneddon. I'm Rob Morrow with WSC. Grateful to be part of this project team. And as I transition this presentation into adaptation measures, this next slide is really just a compilation of the slides that Ms. Hetrick presented earlier, of showing how the coastal hazard, again, just coastal hazards, not rain hazard, rain-based storms, start to get into downtown. And so building on what Thomas just presented, which was historically a rain-based risk, we're now piling on these other risks. We got coastal waves. We have got groundwater rising underneath into these gravity sewers, which is increasing I&I, and then eventually tides. And so so the risks are then piling on, and so it's changing some of the adaptation calculus going forward. Next slide, please.
Well,
Oh, yes.
those depictions, are they just without rainfall?
This is all without rainfall, and I think we lost the legend there, but it's a combination of what was presented earlier: coastal wave hazards, as well as eventually tidal, daily tidal flooding.
And are you looking at the combination with rainfall?
Yes, we don't have that. Yeah, go ahead. That's part of the plan modeling, right? Yeah, so we don't have that mapped right now. So on the left is the image that Thomas just presented of the existing gravity system, and on the right is what's called a low pressure sewer system. And as its name, it's operated rather than a gravity under low pressure pumping, and the consequence of that is that you've got pressure going out, and so there's no I&I happening into the system. And then the only place that system can be accessed is at the on-site tank that would go in at each individual property, which would basically replace their existing lateral. And so as long as that's sealed, you now have a sewer system that is sealed from I&I. Now, it's a big investment, which is the reason it's not done without a need to do it. And so we'll talk about it a little more, but there's property side conversion, which is the tank and grinder pump and going out to the street. And then once you're in the street and sidewalk, that's the city's system. And these are like 2-3-inch pipes compared to the existing gravity system as 6, 8, 12-inch pipes. And so conversion-wise, it can be done fairly simply within existing systems or outside of it if it needs to be. Next slide, please. So we've laid out our adaptation measures and triggered-based approach based on levels of sea level rise. With the near term over the next 20 years is basically 0.8 feet of sea level rise. The midterm, 20 to 50 years, is 0.8 to 2.5 feet. And then beyond 50 plus is 2.5 feet, 2.5 feet of sea level rise plus. And of course, this is our first cut at this. The first time the city's been structuring this, a lot of data is being collected. So part of this will be updating this analysis in the future. But our first cut at this, going out to what I just laid out for the low pressure system, that kind of system is going to be needed in the low-lying areas along the coast that, again, flood from rainwater, but are going to be looking at relatively frequent flooding from coastal storms. And so you back out from there, and to have that in place, you're going to need individual customers to be able to provide that water into the system. And you guys already have a conversion program in place for a lateral gets inspected and it's leaky, you replace it. So what we're trying to do is then lay out a program where you don't want to have somebody replace that lateral with what's there now and have to replace it again with a low pressure system 5 years later or 10 years later. So trying to, part of the recommendations out of this study, one of the main ones is a couple more studies to really lay out a detailed roadmap. Like for the low pressure system, for example, what areas would need to be connected eventually and when do we expect that? And then back that out for how properties are impacted. And then also for I&I, what are our I&I options? How are they doing with the existing ones and what additional measures can be taken considering the additional risks that are coming? So on the low pressure system, that's really focused on the low-lying coastal area. Then big picture, the I&I issue, eventually there becomes a diminishing return on investment of sealing every line in the city as the risks pile on. And another way to manage that is to actually build storage at El Estero to manage that water coming in. And so we're assuming that happens at some point. The upcoming I&I work will look at the trade-offs of when that makes sense. It's not a cheap project. It impacts everything at El Estero. So obviously you want to make very informed decisions for that timing. But something like that will probably be needed eventually. It's just a question of when. And then you want to continue sealing the high-risk areas. Again, these coastal areas that are already seeing rain flooding, when you add on these other risks, you want to make sure those are being sealed, like Thomas described.
Could I ask a question while
just-
we're on this one? This just the slide before with the picture of the two. I'm thinking of our SLIP program and this happening, and it would be so great to have it color coded on like what is my responsibility as a property owner and what is the city's responsibility. Like on the second graph, there's the property line, so I'm assuming, does that mean this low pressure system pump is the property owner's responsibility to purchase? Or I guess that's a question I can ask it later too, but I see we're moving on to like Ellisdale and other things.
Councilmember Sneddon, we will add that. I think that's a great suggestion. Again, we've been developing these graphics, but that's a great point. For clarity, what do they currently own? What do private property owners currently own, and what do we expect they're going to own with some of these proposed changes?
It's a great opportunity because it's a great graphic.
Yeah.
But with the SLIP program too, the confusion about
Great.
like what am I responsible for?
Exactly.
Or-
Great
yeah.
feedback.
I also had a question on the low pressure system. So it sounds like this is something that can be sort of hybrid with the existing system. It's not like it needs to be changed all at once.
Yeah, that's right. Like, for example, if a property owner is having to convert and they expect, the plan is for that area to be a low-pressure system in 10 years, they can put their, the tank and pump in, and it'll just pump into the gravity system until it's converted. So it's nice like that. And then for the low-pressure system to happen, you kind of need a minimum number of sites to actually have the system work. And so that's where the phasing comes in.
I see. And are there other places in the region that are transitioning or have transitioned to a low pressure system?
Yeah, so Rincon area, south of Carpinteria, converted a few years ago. Montecito's looking at it now, but they're actually, because of the hills, actually is a main driver versus a gravity system. It's actually a potentially cheaper system. But there's it's used fairly frequently, especially in high groundwater areas and coastal areas. I don't know if you have anything to add.
I was just going to, I don't think anybody voluntarily wants to put in additional infrastructure or maintain additional infrastructure. So I think that's something that we're going to be wrestling with, like what is going to be the catalyst for this. But this needs to happen sooner rather than later. I thought this was out past 20 years that we could wait, and it's based on the data, it's not. It's something we actually need to start working on now. And I think for the community to get their heads wrapped around this need, I think timing, it's all about timing and what that looks like. Being prepared to implement this when the time is appropriate.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I actually sort of had a question related to that, which is like, how will that be communicated to people? Like is it going to be street by street, or is it going to be, like what's the region? How long of a runway are we going to give people to plan for that kind of
Commissioner
expense?
Cootie, this plan basically recommends that we create another plan to pressurize in phases. And so what that would look like is for any phase that needs to happen, we would look at code changes as part of that plan to be passed through ordinance committee and city council and through a public process that essentially requires new connections first so if you're putting in a new connection or totally redoing your lateral, that you put in the pressurized infrastructure. So that will be the first step. The first area to need pressurization is kind of the soonest is in like 20 years. And so that we have some time for those new connections to come over time. At some point, we will have to make a big push for the existing connections. And we really want to look at as part of that plan, like incentives and really helping people. Because in some of these low-lying areas, it corresponds to our low-income areas, and we're really going to need to help people. And so really, the next step is really identifying the exact areas, providing that process, providing the code changes, and getting it going, and then looking at incentives. So it's again, that wraparound approach, not just.
For sure.
Yeah.
I just meant like from the perspective of if it's work you need done on your house, right? Like, if I need a new roof in 10 years, or I need to buy a new car in 5 years or whatever, like you can make that part of your, like from a household standpoint, part of your like financial planning for things that are coming in. So like, what would be the cost to homeowners? I assume it's sort of dependent on your property and like whatever, but what's the general cost and what can people start looking to? So it's not like, surprise, you need to pay 50 grand tomorrow, right? Like that sort of thing, just in terms of, even just getting people to do it without fighting, right? Is like knowing that it's coming kind of thing.
Yeah. Interesting times ahead. No, it is an interesting, and I think, I don't know if this is good or bad, but a lot of these properties have probably gotten the full life out of their gravity lateral now. And so to Councilmember Sneddon's point, how do we how do we move quickly and make that potentially even part of the SLIP program to kind of help steer people that way. Hey, if you're going to spend $15,000 to replace your lateral, you might consider for $20,000 you can go to this grinder pump where you need a 1-inch lateral instead of a 4-inch lateral, and it's all like of a sealed situation. So
And is that a $5,000?
that's what we're going to work on.
Realistic?
That's what we're going to work on it because it really depends on the location, how much space they have, and all that kind of stuff. But these grinder pump units are they're pretty common in many areas. If you live around a lake, things like that, that's pretty common. They are canned units. They come with the pump, with the wiring, everything. You buy the whole unit, you dig a hole, and you basically place it in there. Of course, with it is probably some type of ongoing maintenance. Your plumber would have to come out once a year and probably do some type of maintenance to these things. But they aren't like totally unique or unproven, right? These are things that are pretty. So I think to that end, I think there's a lot we can rely on, when you get to other communities that are used to inundation, this is pretty common.
Sure. Again, speaking for people, you don't have to take a class to buy a house, right? Like anyone can just theoretically do that. And so it's something that I don't think people have necessarily thought. I know that sounds ridiculous, sorry. No. But right, there's things you don't know, right? And so this is going to be a thing that a lot of people around town have never thought about, or, you think about your sewer lateral if you get but some people have owned a house for 30 years and never thought about their sewer lateral.
Wastewater just disappears.
Right, 100% is the best. Really appreciate that. But truly, right, I mean, it's something that I don't think a lot of people are thinking about, so it's worth, this group is pretty good about communicating with with the citizens and whatever, and I think that might be something we want to include in the messaging, because like I said, it's a surprise, but you don't want it to be surprise and you owe us $20,000 right now versus surprise, you might want to think about this expense that's coming up.
Yeah, thank you for those comments, Commissioner Cooney. I did just want to point out something with regard to timing. It's one thing for freshwater rainfall to flood the system and cause capacity improvements. It's another thing for saltwater to enter the system, particularly through groundwater where it's seeping into the pipes, or if it gets in at high levels. And you might know this, but the public might not, is that when saltwater enters the system, it causes us to have to close down Ellistor Water Resources Center treatment process. And the reason for that is that our treatment process depends on freshwater bacteria that will die if there are large amounts of saltwater in the inflows. And so either we have to shut down the system or we're shut down because the bugs die for about 3 weeks. And so it really is, the saltwater issue is much more elevated and is really driving the timing and the phasing of this pressurization. Of course, the pressurization will very much help with this capacity problem, where we're also seeing rainfall flooding. But when we start to really nail down the timing, it really relates to where we're seeing saltwater either in the superficial groundwater level or as storm surge and tidal inundation.
Yep, thank you. Yeah, and as you see, we're highlighting this is coming, and there's lots of those questions to work through to make it a real plan to roll out. So next item, again, we just talked about this, flooding in and around El Estero. So El Estero is raised, but getting to there can be an issue during flooding events. And as we noted earlier, those are projected to get worse. And so staff has had an informal plan in place on how to manage these conditions. And so one of the recommendations is just to formalize it, to help with staff transitions, help with justifying investments if needed. But mainly in the near term, it's going to be a little bit of the same. In the long term, when you start to get more frequent flooding, again from rain and then coastal events, there begins to be a need for more permanent investment. And in the long term, what we've thrown out there is it's actually pretty good access from Highway 101. It's not simple or cheap, but it can be a way to avoid the low points of the underpasses, of the low points of the roads all around. And this being a critical facility could make sense for the city, And then, of course, there's other ancillary benefits for others who may be involved.
So Ms. Hetrick had pointed this out, but we are embarking on a stormwater study, somewhat particularly related to this drainage basin, and I believe Sycamore as well. And I think that's going to be really informative because I think a lot of this flooding, and again, we're buying ourselves time here, can be addressed via some type of a Laguna Channel pump station. We have one currently, but is it adequately sized? Could it be sized? Because all of this flooding that's occurring here is really because it can't get out Laguna Channel. It's just a weak point, I guess you want to call it that. So there is solutions, but again, that only buys you time until, the sea level is at such a level that it basically just comes right back around the pumps and back in again. So buys you time, but ultimately not a long-term solution.
Well, this was a question I had too about like, are there, and I know we've talked about this before, but like stormwater capture and storage opportunities higher up in the sewer shed or watershed. I know when I've asked this question before, you basically say we want to get it out as quickly as possible, but could there be some other opportunities there to attenuate that like instantaneous flow?
And I think they are working on that. I know there's a lot of incentives to do like rain gardens and things like that to try and slow it down, trying to get it into the ground. But when we get like November, we just get just deluges. Like those systems become quickly overwhelmed and you're just trying to get it now safely to the ocean.
Yeah, but what about like more of like a gray infrastructure storage? Like I know that the low impact development kind of stuff only can capture so much, but like bigger kind of storage operations, is that something that's being considered for stormwater management?
Commissioner Snyder, yes, that is something that's being considered. I think the more likely scenario, though, is the distributed low-impact development. And that's something we've been looking at studies in other urban places like LA, where they've looked at just like removing 30% of permeable or impermeable surfaces actually reduces flooding by 30%, whereas putting up flood walls actually only reduces flooding by 5% because you cause flooding on the other side. So yeah, in the upper watershed in particular, any kind of permeable, even a little bit, does actually help a lot. But at the scale we're looking at and with these rainfall rates, it's really going to have to be distributed to the extent possible.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think what also works against this is just how our topography. Like it's just really steep here. You go to less steep communities and you have space. You can have infiltration areas and slow water down, but it's really hard, really difficult here to hold it all back, especially when you get those Pineapple Expresses coming in from the south and they just hit these mountains and lift and just dump 16 inches of rain at San Marcos Pass,
So slide-wise or adaptation-wise, we're moving on from off-site flooding to on-site flooding. And in the previous picture, you could see the 100-year flood is kind of creeping on the edge of El Estero from Laguna Channel. And so really, the flooding risk in the near to midterm is that overtopping from Laguna Channel. So obviously, we just talked about a lot of work that could happen along Laguna Channel that could then reduce that risk. But ultimately, there's probably going to need to be some kind of flood wall system around El Estero if the Laguna Channel flooding can't be managed. And so for the midterm, we've assumed that would be in place. Again, this plan's kind of laying out what the future could be based on what we know now, and trying to be conservative of what's going to be needed. But a flood wall would provide strong protection from flooding to continue operations at El Estero. In the interim, what they've been doing is kind of putting in temporary measures like flood barriers into low-lying areas, which works until it just becomes too much, and then it really hinders your operations. And so again, this isn't something that's needed tomorrow, but something that's going to be needed in the future. And following on the stormwater work that's being done, is a recommendation to evaluate when that may be needed, and again, interplaying with the investments that could happen with Laguna Channel. And then in the long term, and we're talking this long term is more end of the century, eventually you just get overwhelmed because sea level rise, you can't really control. Laguna Channel and the floodgate helps get water out and controls backflow from the sea, but at some point the levels get too high where you're losing control of that. And at some point, El Estero, the flooding at and around El Estero is going to be, the investments required to manage that are going to be really high. And also, I should say, part of the requirement in this plan from the city's MPDS permit with the waste at El Estero was to look at a relocation of El Estero. And it's actually a common permit requirement for all permits right now for coastal plants. So what we did a high level look at what it would cost to replace it, to move it. So you have a new wastewater treatment plant, but also you've got to reroute all the wastewater in the city that is currently going by gravity to the coast, and instead you capture it and pump it inland to get away from the flooding. So the pipes are actually just as much, and the pumps are just as much as the new plant. And so we've got we just have, again, a high-level look at what that would take, but it also requires land, about 15 acres. We've included provisions for potentially for potable reuse in the future to be included, but there's limited places that can happen in the city. So again, as a long-term planning tool for this, it's thinking about having the city decision makers in the back of their mind, knowing we may need a space for the plant, by the end of the century, and making sure there's something available. I should also say that other areas along the coast have similar issues. Calita's plant's a very low-lying area, so there's potential regional solutions too. And so nothing is really set now, but we wanted to do this as a first step of planning of like what could the future look like. Did you want to add anything?
I'll go ahead on that. So I would just emphasize that this decision is really toward the end of the century where we need to decide whether we would relocate it or invest heavily in particularly access improvements. So things like a new off-ramp off the freeway to El Estero. And so we'll have some time in that time period to see how flood control measures are doing and, see all the things. And so I want to emphasize that this decision is not before us now. As part of our NPDS permit, we were required to look at existing city properties that could fit a plant. And so as part of that analysis, it was preliminarily identified that the 108-acre municipal golf course could fit it. As part of one of the many uses out there, that we are not saying that El Estero is moving to the golf course, because in reality, as Mr. Morrow mentioned, all of our regional partners are going to be experiencing the same thing, and actually in some cases much worse than us. And so it really just wouldn't make sense for us to make that kind of huge investment without talking to our regional partners and partnering up. And so we anticipate a process of looking regionally and for solutions, not just looking within our city boundaries at the sites we currently own, if that makes sense.
And we do get to this, but the whole idea here is to update this plan every 10 years. So we're checking the data. Is the changes that we anticipated happening at the rate we're changing or slower, and make adjustments as necessary.
Okay, so my last slide is on the last major hazard, shoreline erosion, which Ms. Hetrick covered fairly well, so I won't spend much time on here. The biggest risks are the utilities within Cabrillo Boulevard, and so obviously the discussion around that is much bigger than just water and wastewater lines. There is a potable water line in Chase Palm Park that will eventually need to be moved in the midterm, in the 20 to 50 year mark. And some work to help protect the desalination weir box. Otherwise, the main thing coming into this plan that we were worried about was the West Beach sewer, the sewer that's under West Beach, under the sand, and the initial regional projections for erosion had that being exposed in 20 to 40 years. Those were kind of really generic projections at erosion. So as part of the waterfront plan and our efforts, site-specific evaluations were conducted. And I think as you saw earlier, actually West Beach, rather than eroding, is actually gaining sand because of the breakwater. And so so that's good news for West Beach Sewer. This was one of the biggest concerns from the regional board, understandably, because having a raw wastewater on the beach, potential exposure. So the good news is, from the West Beach perspective, there's erosion. It actually is going to be a gaining beach, so there isn't a need to replace West Beach in the foreseeable future. And actually, but we did lay out some ways that could happen if needed. And we did spend a decent amount of time doing profiles on East Beach for the El Estero outfall and for the desalination intake. Again, so pipelines going out to the beach or out into the ocean. And we've identified some specific things to do there, but for the most part, those are going to be fairly well protected. The desal work on the intake's happening right now, so that was actually one of the biggest concerns. And so erosion-wise, it's really looking at kind of the bigger picture erosion on East Beach and addressing that from the water wastewater perspective. And I think I'm going to hand it, Mr. Hagmark.
Yes.
So,
All right.
if I could, so my question is, you haven't added in rainfall yet to these predictions, forecasts, planning. Is that going to be a large component of change to these predictions right now, that all of a sudden everything you've laid out as recommendations are going to be accelerated?
So Commissioner Young, so our coastal hazards, it's very complicated, but our coastal hazards model does assume some input from our creeks combining with the sea. It's kind of like an average creek flow. It doesn't, and then separately, we've looked at the 100-year rain event combined with sea level rise for El Estero. What we don't have is this increase in rainfall patterns for our bigger storms combined with sea level rise. And so that's the next thing that we're going to look at. Part of the problem is that the state modeling doesn't include that either. And so it really is a new analysis that would be very site-specific for us. But yes, it's likely to show worse flooding.
So this would be the 100-year rain event hitting at a king tide, kind of.
Or the like
the
20-year
storm
rain event, more likely like the 20-year.
hitting at a king tide.
Yeah, so interestingly though, just to allay your fears a bit, I was surprised to learn when I entered this whole arena that the rain event, like the 10-year rain event, let's say, the big rain events do not usually occur at the same time as the big wave events. It's usually preceded, the wave events usually precede the rain events, and so the timing is usually a couple of days. So really what we're more concerned about is making sure that we model rainfall coming down with long-term sea level rise and how it might back up. We're less concerned about modeling the 100-year wave event with the 100-year rain event, because it's very unlikely for that to occur. I know, it's a lot, trust me, I'm aware.
It's like rolling the dice, I mean, the cost of perfection, to absolutely protect could be great. And that event may not happen with any great frequency. Mm-hmm. But look what happened in Montecito when that perfect storm came through and just dumped a ton of water and blew that watershed out.
Right after a fire, right? Right, exactly. It's like the worst case scenario, yeah. So yeah, I think we've got a lot of work to do on this, and this, I think that's one of the challenges of being an agency that's at the tip of the spear. I just really want to recognize Ms. Hetrick's work on this. She, when it comes to the state, is really out there in front, like way out there in front. And so it's tough. It's tough being out in front. There's not a lot of examples to go off. we're blazing that territory. We know this is going to be a living document. We're going to continue to update it. But I think the conversation has started, and I think you're bringing up great points, like how much weight do we put on kind of this worst case scenario, and what does that look like? What we see in other communities that have this type of flooding, there's no occupants on the first floor. You go out to Honolulu, for example, you can't live on the first floor. They've gotten rid of that because they know that that's a chance, and they wanted to eliminate housing issues. So they now have to build for that kind of inundation. And we potentially will have to consider it, but that's, again, a step in what will likely not be an area that will be occupied 100 years from now. So anyway, lots to get into. For the time being, focused on the next 20 years, I'm going to try and bring this home. We are going to continue to do a lot of the activities we're on, but again, a focus on sealing manholes. That's not only the manhole lids, but we are lining manholes to make sure there's no infiltration there. Lining pipes, as we heard from Mr. Welch last month, we are rehabbing about 1% of our mains. We have, based on our CCTV video, we believe we need to increase that. So that's going to be a conversation we're going to be having, is what does it mean to go to 1% to 2 or 3%? Is that what we need to do to try and get the system sealed up, and try and get a better handle on I&I? We're going to wrap up our I&I study. And again, I think this is one of those things you're constantly checking in to see if we're making progress, drilling into sewer sheds to see if we can get to the bottom of where most of our inflows are coming from. And then, of course, starting that conversation about what it means to pressurize, in particular, those low-lying areas that we know are going to be impacted. Turning to El Estero, the flood wall systems, I think that goes hand in hand with dealing with stormwater. So figure out a way to get stormwater out when it does come. Access, potentially thinking about differently about how we staff and how potentially house people at El Estero during major storm events when we lose access. And then, as you know, we're working on a capacity improvement project. We have several, again, further up in the sewer shed to deal with the increasing development that's coming and making sure that we have capacity in the sewer system where we know there's limitations right now. And then again, hardening or relocating all that infrastructure that's on the beach that we know of. Key recommendations, so we're going to continue to do the monitoring. We've got groundwater monitoring that's going on. Managing TDS, keeping an eye on that. We know what we're taking regular samples at El Estero, so we know what the TDS looks like. We know what baseline looks like. In fact, there was a project say 15 years ago in which we were picking up, particularly at high tides, TDS in the trunk main, and we went in and rehabbed the trunk main and sealed that up, and that did a huge reduction in TDS from that project. And then talking about beach berms, again, that's providing kind of temporary arrangements, but also maybe even clearing it if we know a big storm's coming in, clearing the sand out of the way so that we know stormwater can be released easier. Modeling flooding, this is, again, getting to that, like, how can we manage in the near term the flooding that we know is going on now? And then, of course, changes in development standards. And then lastly, I want to end up on the summary. So we talked about this, is it's updating this plan regularly, phased implementation, monitoring, again, constant feedback loop there. Looking at the next few years, we do know we got some pretty significant studies that we need to do, preliminary design work. Most of that is funded via either grants or, as you may recall, the Water Commission had us put in, we're doing $500,000. Is it $500,000 for water and wastewater to go towards sea level rise work? So that's make our matching grant aspect of it. But looking ahead at some of these infrastructure costs, again, it's a big range because we don't know exactly what the scope of those projects, but somewhere between 50 and 130 million over the next 20 years is currently unfunded. And as you know, our rates have gone up pretty dramatically and don't include any of this stuff. So a lot to work on there. And of course, the staffing to support all that. So bottom line, we got a lot of work to do on this. And to keep in mind, for wastewater specifically, a 1% increase in wastewater rates will generate about $300,000. So when you're talking about needing to generate potentially $3 million a year, that's a 10% increase in wastewater rates just to deal with that aspect of it. So we got a lot of hard work to do. We've certainly got rates set in place that are going to take us out to 2028. But then we've got some big decisions there about what we need to do to take care of the aging infrastructure that we have. And then lastly, if you guys have any questions, you call Melissa.
Yeah.
Okay.
I do want to say from the chair's standpoint, Ms. Hedrick and her team have done a great job. And
Yes.
the presentation this morning was very edifying for me and I think for the rest of the commission. A little tiny note. Where you talked in there about having accommodations on site because El Estero become an island and being able to like house staff during big events. That's really major because we've had those instances. So it was just a little note in there. I think that you're thinking ahead as to operationally this facility cannot shut down.
Cannot sit down.
Yeah, big deal. Other comments, Kristen?
It's kind of a big picture philosophical maybe or policy question, I guess, but I'm thinking back to the original vulnerability assessment plan, and Acting Chair Davis, you'll remember too, and there was that chart with the Venn diagram of the three, ways of approaching, and then where they all intersect was hybrid, but the three ways were protecting or armoring, planned retreat, and then adapting or something like that, like having the higher level. And it was that anything that we did from that initial plan would be something in this hybrid section. And I guess my question is, it seems like we're kind of going for armoring and protecting for as long as we can and then retreating. Just kind of, it seems like that sort of maybe policy direction is sort of, let's hold on to this as long. And my question is, it is, I guess, philosophical, but like, if El Estero was an estuary again, I mean, it's not I'm not suggesting that necessarily, but I do think there's the conversation to be had with the public about the three different options and where do we fall on that, because I remember in that planning process too, we talked about how no coastal city would have the billions of dollars necessary to completely protect and armor and hold on to everything where it is. So there's enough time in this plan, every 10 years or sooner. There's definitely enough time to be looking at that, but at some point that discussion of how many resources do you put into protecting something that will eventually have to retreat is maybe part of the conversation in the next 10 years. But I don't want to lose sight of that was the three different ways, and probably some hybrid was how it was presented in that plan, which I still think is a good framework for different portions of the city. But really excellent to see this so quickly come back. I mean, we identified in that committee that the waterfront and the wastewater and water treatments would be the initial. And I'm also thinking, in 100 years' time, and we're talking about, in 100 years might have to move it. In 100 years' time, maybe the treatment happens at your own toilet and it goes out and all just goes out to the ocean completely treated and better than it ever was and has the right salinity and everything else to make everything. So it's I think it's good that it's an adaptable adaptation plan that, things might really, really change. I mean, are we really thinking that in 100 years we're going to be storing our sewage and treating it and collecting it from all these different places? I mean, I think maybe, but maybe not. I don't know.
Councilmember
thank you.
Sneddon, those are really good points. And I think, You heard a lot today about protection in place because it's hard to move. You know, it's a $1 billion exercise to move the wastewater treatment plant, and we need to have wastewater lines, so we have to protect them somehow. But I would just say, overall, for our citywide approach, I'm actually seeing quite the opposite, like on the waterfront plan side of things. It really, when we look at protect in place versus retreat versus accommodation, what I'm really always thinking about are what are the impacts of each, right, or the benefits. And in some cases, protection in place doesn't have a big impact on neighboring areas, or maybe it does. But for instance, on our waterfront area, like if we just threw up a seawall along our beaches right now, we would lose the beach. And so as part of that plan, actually, the majority of the plan is to move our assets back, our public assets back as far as possible. We do hit a line at Cabrillo Boulevard where we're talking about a lot of parcels and a lot of utilities. And so there is an assumption there that we, at least in this near-term, midterm time period, that we will protect at that location. So I think it's really just trade-offs. Also, for instance, like with flood control projects, we're launching that lower Sycamore Creek flood control project. It's a widening of Sycamore Creek from Highway 101 south. That's a widening and a restoration project. So that's not a hardening project. So I think in the overall scheme of things, we are actually doing the suite. I think it's harder with the wastewater system being so critical to consider retreat at this juncture.
Thank you. Such excellent framing of that and where that falls in the three approaches in the hybrid. Thank you. Thank you for pointing all those out.
Good point. Good point.
I was just going to add that, a compliments to what I see the vision the Water Commission has provided, or the value. Water resources is not new to climate impacts. I mean, we've been dealing with this for decades in various forms, most recently with the drought. And, this commission had the foresight. We had kept our permits for desal. We had a plan if we were running out of water. We had a vision of what we were going to do, and we executed on that vision. And I think continuing with that kind of legacy with this next phase of climate is setting us up when that catalyst happens. This commission has a plan. We've worked through this plan. This is what we're going to do when this large inundation happens, potentially hundreds of properties are damaged. This commission has a plan. We've vetted that plan with the community, and we're standing by ready to implement it. And I think that I think that's just one of the greatest benefits of this commission is you guys have the opportunity to just look ahead. Here's what we need to do, have those tough decisions. And so when the incident happens, we're not planning, we're executing on our plan.
Great. Jeff?
Could you bring back slide 16? Because I've got a question about that. And I wanted to kind of better understand. That's the graph with the red in the middle, projected timing of sea level. Yeah, there we go. So how does likelihood of occurrence relate to this? I mean, we're talking about, the risk, the level of risk, I think, to assets, correct? But what's the likelihood of the red line at this point happening?
Commissioner Young, that is a very complicated question. So we did not put all the projections on this slide, and there are projections lower. It's just that the projections change based on two major factors. One is global emissions. So what we are showing here is basically global emissions continuing at the general rate that they're going now or increasing. What we've taken off the slide is the projections that assume that the world essentially stops emitting carbon tomorrow. We just don't think it's a very unlikely scenario. And so consequently, I don't even put them on here anymore because it's just not going to happen. The other big factor is how the Antarctic ice sheet is melting. So when you see that big line, the dotted one, that's the worst case scenario, very unlikely that the catastrophic failure of the Antarctic ice sheet. So equally, I think it doesn't even have a chance at this point. We don't know what the likelihood is, but it's very, very low. And then the middle two lines are kind of the bottom aqua one is assuming our current trajectory of emissions, but not influences from the Antarctic ice sheet. And then the orange one is assuming some influences from the Arctic ice sheet. So in a very complicated way, I would say the orange one is likely but still conservative, whereas the aqua one is like, it's something like more than 50% likely to be exceeded. So the way that these are talked about is the likelihood that we'll exceed them. So I think thinking of it between those two lines is, and using the orange line as like a kind of your conservative assumption, especially in a critical asset like this, is the right approach. But we put the worst case on here mostly because our funders want us to, because it's a critical asset. And to let you know that it's possible that that could occur, even though it's like 1 in a million type of thing.
Okay, that helps. Thank you.
Yeah.
Good question. Okay, is there any public comment on this item?
Acting Chair Davis, we have no speakers for public comment on this item.
Okay. This is an informational item only, so no motion necessary. Again, thank you all for the work that you've done, and we'll look forward to seeing you back here in a number of months. Okay.
Thank you very much.
That takes us to item 6. This is the director's report. Mr. Hagmark, we're running over a little bit,
Yes.
so it's up to you.
Vice Chair Davis, I'll make this really quick.
Chop, chop.
So, as you might guess, we did see a significant reduction in water usage in November. November is not known for being wet, and I think we broke some records with rainfall in November. Water usage was down 28% from normal, and the financial impacts of that will probably show up in January. So I will report back on that. Right now, we're about 3% off of revenues, which is, we're forecasting a $2.3 million shortage at the end of the year. Wastewater is 1.3%, or about 500,000 by the end of the year. So a lot less impacts. Happy to address any questions in my packet, but I just wanted to make a few interesting comments. We did select a water distribution supervisor, so really excited about that. Andrew Benson, who's a lead, is going to be moving into that role, so really excited. He's been with us for a while, and excited to see what he does with that role. So, also very interesting, Carpentria Valley Water District has a new general manager that will be starting in late January. You guys might know her, Kelly Dyer. So Kelly will be taking place of Bob McDonnell, and I forget, the January 19th or something like that. So really exciting to have someone knowledgeable of local. It's always never know what you're going to get, and with a recruitment like that, so excited to have someone with such local knowledge. And bids opened for the CAP project, which was Carpentria's potable reuse project. They came in substantially over their estimates. Board's trying to figure out where to go from here. Do they just bite the bullet? They also have rate challenges to go with that, so they've got some pretty big challenges. Their general manager did reach out and ask potentially about a water sales agreement with the city. I told him if his board was interested in that, he needs to send a letter to our city administrator, and we would agendize that for council to give staff direction to sit down and have those conversations. So he'd mentioned they were looking for about 1,000 acre-feet a year. About a week apart, Montecito Sanitary District is also looking at having to make substantial improvements to their wastewater treatment plant, and also reached out wondering if the city would be interested in treating their wastewater, of which I told them the same thing. Please send a letter to our city administrator, and we'll agendize this for our council conversation. Again, I'm a big fan of regional projects. I think they do benefit our customers as well as our neighboring agencies, but we'll see where that goes. I don't know if that's just how serious they are about those things. And then the energy master plan. So we're a couple months from wrapping that up, really having some detailed conversations. And I just wanted to give you all a heads up that a lot of things are not penciling out. It's been really interesting to see how the energy market has been changing. And I think it speaks to why at a staff level, we've been so frustrated, like trying to get some of these projects off the ground, and they just don't financially pencil out. And you know how tight our budgets are and our rates. And so it is really hard, even though you'd really like to put in that battery or that solar or whatever it is, or buy that new pump. If it doesn't show a payoff in at least the next 10 to 12 years, it's hard to make that kind of investment. And so I'm bringing that to you because kind of preparing you for where we're coming, which is we identified a ton of things that we could do to generate electricity, reduce energy, but a lot of those, not all, but a lot of those just don't have financial payoff unless things change in the energy market or grants change. But it is, we're still hoping, battery technology, the prices for that come down and that becomes more viable. But it's really been frustrating for staff. We were hoping there's going to be some things that shook loose that we could implement as part of upcoming capital projects. And as we've talked about, the Cater Reservoir Resiliency Project, optimum area for solar there is not penciling out. It does not show that it will be cheaper than us just staying on the grid right now. And that's even with expectations for grid costs to go up, so maddening, to say the least. But we will be reporting out on that and give you a full detail on all that. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Great. Any questions? Anybody from the public?
Acting Chair Davis, we have no speakers for public comment on this item.
Okay, well, great. Well, thank you, everybody. It's been a good meeting. We will adjourn at 11:14, and I wish everybody happy holidays. Merry Christmas.
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays.
Yeah, you bet.